What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel and to another video. In today's video, I'll show you how I make these baby gates. Now these are both shaker style gates, meaning there's a panel on the inside of this outside frame. In this video, I'll take you through each of the steps to show you exactly how I made these, as well as what they look like when they were installed. If it's your first time here on this channel, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on any upcoming videos. And now let's get into how I made these gates.
So the basic frame or the outside of this baby gate will be made from 2x4s, and I use these to make a shaker style gate. So it's 4 boards cut all together, and there are 2 pairs of different lengths, so similarly to making a table apron. Anyway, here are the 4 boards. And the first thing that I did with these after cross cutting them to length was to take them to the table saw, and I ripped one edge off of each board. So these are 3.5 inches wide, and I just took a little sliver off of each side to get a straight edge. Now while this is not a true straight edge like you would get on a joiner, this is close enough so it worked for the application that I was using it for. After I had ripped one edge straight, I moved the fence in it just a little, and then I put the already cut side against the fence, ran this through the table saw again, essentially giving me a flat edge on both ends of the board. Once the boards were milled up flat on each side, I then cut a channel using a dado stack on the table saw. So the dado stack is a 3/4 inch wide stacked blade, and it cuts a groove in each of these. Here's what the groove looks like after one pass on the dado blade. So I did adjust the height of the blade upwards and make 3 passes overall, so it did cut a deeper groove than what you see here. And here's a closer look at what the grooves looked like when they were finished. So the dado blade made this quick work to leave a nice groove on each board. Next, I adjusted the height of the dado stack to match what was left on the outer rail of the channel. And then I used the dado stack to cut a 3/4 inch section off of each side of the channel, which would leave a tongue that would fit in the groove of the other board. Now this will make more sense here in a minute when we get an up-close view. But the dado stack worked really well for cutting a wider channel off of this rather than just a regular saw blade. Now this is only done on 2 pieces of the frame. So because the tongue is 3/4 inches and the groove on the other boards are 3/4 inches, they should fit perfectly together. This is the first time that I've ever done this, and this is the first time I've actually ever used a dado stack. So this was a little sloppy and I probably could have done it better, but it did work. Next, I ran each of these pieces through the planer to get a smoother surface. Now I probably should have done this before I cut the tongues off of these, but we've all done things out of order, whether intentional or unintentional before. So either way, no big deal. These went through the planer, the surfaces turned out fine, and then I was able to move on to the next step. So with all 4 pieces cut and planed and cleaned up, I was able to lay them out and get the basic outline of the frame. So now here's what I'm talking about whenever I said that the tongue would fit in the groove. So they go together like this. It was almost a perfect fit, and that is actually the joint that will keep this frame together. They'll be glued later, but for now you get the basic idea of how this thing will go together. The one thing to remember here is that there is that 3/4 inch groove in every piece in the center, so that's where the panel will fit when it goes inside of this. So to get the dimensions of the panel, I measured across each side of the frame, and then I added it almost 1.5 inches to each side, since there would be a 3/4 inch groove on each side of the panel. So for the interior panel, I'm just using a sheet of 3/4 inch particle board. I had previously cut this down to a smaller length, but it was an original 4x8 sheet. And I just copied the distance from when I measured the frame onto this, and then I cut each edge using my track saw to get it to the accurate dimension. And a lot of other videos or other ways to make this panel will include individual boards in the middle and then just the outer frame nailed or glued across. That'll work fine, but making a shaker style gate with a panel inside will be way more sturdy and hold together much better overall. So after the inside panel was cut out, I wanted to dry fit everything together to make sure that my measurements were correct. So the easiest way I found to do this was to set the panel inside of the apron piece and then use the actual bench as a hammer to secure the pieces with the grooves. So I traced a line of where the outside pieces would go, and then I took them back off. Now the reason that I'm doing this is so I can measure parallel lines on the panel to cut grooves to make the panel look like it's individual boards. So I measured the center, and then using my broken square that's made it to another video, I marked a line perpendicular to the outside of the frame that I could later cut the groove on. So I measure equal spacing on each side, and then I repeat this with the square. Now you might be thinking, dude, why don't you just use individual boards or tongue and groove? Well, if you want to get a good idea, take a look at the price of tongue and groove boards versus a sheet of particle board, and you will understand why I decided to go this route. So I used my router with a V-groove bit that fits on the track, and then I cut the groove out, just plunged a little bit into the board, which makes these appear like they're tongue and groove panel. So to make sure that the line is parallel to the other, I first put the bit on the lower line, and then I'll move the router to the upper line and make sure the bit hits the line there. Once they're aligned properly, I secure the rail down, and then I can use the router to cut the line that I'm sure will be parallel to the others. I'm just using a simple V-groove router bit, so there's nothing fancy about the bit itself. Here's what the grooves look like after they're cut. So the particle board was a little bit rougher than I was hoping for, but it sanded out and it looked okay overall. But this method allows you to make a board look either like fake shiplap or fake tongue and groove. Here's just a closer look at the router setup. So these two pieces will slide onto the rail, onto the channel, and then the bit will plunge down exactly on the line. So you absolutely do not need a fancy router and rail setup to do this. You can do this with any basic router, just using a straight edge and a good guide on the router. That'll work fine, and you can definitely get similar results using that method. As I mentioned earlier, I sanded all the grooves on the panel, and I think I'm actually using a drywall sponge. So I just briefly went over all of the grooves to get out any of the rough surfaces. So with the inside panel prepared and all the outside pieces cut to length, it was time to assemble this. So I put a little bit of glue in each of the channels, and then the panel was set in the channel one by one. Now, like earlier, I just tapped these on the workbench to use that as a hammer to get them secured. And here's an up close look at how the panel fits down inside of the groove with the piece with the tongue on it. So if the measurements were correct, then the panel will extend actually past the outside apron piece, and the tongue will line up with where the panel ends. And then both the tongue and the panel will fit into the other groove of the side piece. Here's an up close look at how the panel fits inside of each apron piece. So there's a nice line, everything looks good, and there's no rough edges or surfaces. Everything lines up very square as well. I did cut the panel just a little short on one end, but we'll flush cut that off later, so no big deal. After the panel was in place, I used bar clamps to clamp across each piece, and then I let the glue dry overnight. Since these are only held together by the joints and the glue, it is important to let the glue cure fully, so be sure to leave the clamps on long enough. Next, I cut the X piece that would go inside of the frame on top of the panel by resawing a 2x4 on my bandsaw. So I measured the difference from the panel to the outside of the frame piece, and then I rigged up a fence on my bandsaw about that distance. I'll use this top piece, the thinner piece is what I want. So I cut 2 of these for the gate, and then similarly to how I edged up the 2x4s for the frame pieces earlier, I did the same thing on the table saw. So I ripped one edge off to get a flat piece or a flat edge, and then I moved the fence in a little and then ripped the other piece off. So this gave me a flat edge, or close enough to a flat edge to where everything would look nice and square and clean on the X. I then ran each of these boards through the planer a couple times, nothing overly exciting here. This was just to get the rough surface and the saw marks from the bandsaw off, but I did plane them down to about the same width as the apron pieces on the frame. So when the glue was finally dry on the main frame, I took the clamps off, and then I used my track saw to flush cut the ends off of each of these. As I mentioned, I cut the inside panel a little shy on one end, so if I would have cut it perfectly, I wouldn't have had to do this. This is no big deal to trim with the track saw. So I did that quickly, and then everything was nice and flush. Now, as much as I would have loved to have done a full shaker style X in the middle with the groove for the panel to fit in, I wasn't confident that I would be able to cut that accurate just yet. So I laid the new piece for the X over each corner of the panel, and then I used my square to trace very close to where the line would line up in the corners. So I cut these angles out with a miter saw, and these angles are very, very precise. So I lined everything up with the blade first, and then I cut the corners off. Whenever you cut these, you want to leave the line that you marked, because if you cut the line out, then they'll end up too short.
So leave the line and cut as close to the line as you can. So with the angles cut and the use of the good old hand hammer, I was able to pop these in place. Now I put the other X piece over the first, mark the lines on it, and then just how I cut the angles on the corners out, I'll cut these angles out too. So again, you want to leave the line, cut on the inside of the line as close to the line as you can, and then you'll be left with a piece that should fit perfectly in between the corner and the first piece of the X that goes inside the frame. So these will be attached with brad nails and with glue. So I didn't want to get glue all over the panel where the glue wasn't supposed to go. So I put everything in place, then I traced the outline of where all the panel pieces would go. Then I was able to take them out and put glue on those sections. This way I didn't get glue all over the middle of the panel and have to clean that up later. Once they were in place, I attached them using brad nails. I believe I'm using 5/8 inch brad nails here. Now you shouldn't have to worry too much about wood movement. The particle board panel will not move at all, and I thought that these X pieces were thin enough to where that wood movement would not be a concern. So I wiped everything down to get the excess glue off, and at this point we finally have a panel that's beginning to look like the finished product. Which brings us to the next step, which is everyone's favorite, that being sanding. So not a lot of detail here. I just sanded everything down to 220. Don't forget to get the edges because those will show through if they are not sanded. With sanding finished, it was time to prime and paint the panel. Now I'm using a different kind of sprayer here than I normally do. This is a Graco Pro X19. If you can't tell, I am using way too much paint on this, but as I mentioned, this is my first time using this. So I put down about 5,000 times as much paint as I should have. It actually did give a really good finish, but it just was far too much paint. Now I obviously needed a way to attach the gate to the wall, so I used this scrap piece of pine and I just ripped it to the dimension of the gap that was left between where the gate goes and the gate itself. After I had it cut out, I just painted it to match with primer and paint. Now I have two pieces here. One is used for the other gate, so just ignore the one that's closest to the screen. All this will make more sense here in a minute, but we'll get to that as soon as I get these painted. So here's a look at the gate after it's painted, and here's some close-up shots. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I did use a lot more paint than I needed to, but it did turn out very well, and I was happy with the finish. And here are the hinges that I used on these gates. Now you can find a link to these hinges in the description if you are interested in picking them up for yourself. But after the paint's dry, you simply just put them in place. So I lined them up where the outer boards came together, and then I pre-drilled, and then these hinges come with screws, so you don't need to buy any additional hardware if you use these. The package on these hinges said that each was rated for 50 pounds individually. Now the gate was nowhere near 50 pounds, so these hinges should hold this gate very securely. Now the piece here that you saw me paint earlier will be used to attach this gate to the wall. So the hinges on the other side will attach to this piece, and then I will bolt this piece to the wall, which puts the door up. An easy way to remember which side of this piece to drill into is that you're drilling on the opposite side of what is not painted. So I left one section of this piece unpainted, which would go against the wall. Obviously it would never be seen, but this is a good way to remember which side you want to put the screws in. So after both sides of the hinge were attached to the separate piece, it then folded up onto the gate, and this is how the gate would be functional. I did run into a problem where that the gate would not shut all the way, as you can see here. So what happened was that the screws were sticking out and they were hitting the side of the gate, preventing it to close. In order to fix this and make the gate functional, I just squeezed this down and the screws would left an indentation mark on the gate. And from this, I knew which section was too high. So I took a Forstner bit and I put that directly on the indentation, and then I drilled out a little teeny hole to where those grooves would set flush down inside. Now I used a Forstner bit here because Forstner bits are really good about using a perfect clean hole. So this didn't look sloppy. It actually looked really well. Also, because of the way the gate is attached to the wall, these holes will be on the inside and they will never be seen. So you can see here that it did shut all the way and it looked nice and flush when it was closed. Next, I took the same Forstner bit and I pre-drilled a couple holes on this piece. This is where the screws would go for attaching this to the wall. So this way they would be kind of countersunk and they wouldn't stick out. They would be down inside of this piece and never be seen.
So with the holes drilled, a long screw can be used to bolt this straight into the stud. Now I'm using the smaller gate here. I had to do some touch-up paint on the larger gate you saw me make, but it's basically the same idea.
Alright, so I mounted the other gate up to the wall here. Now I didn't want to film inside of the house of who this is going to, so this is basically a demo as to what this will be like. But so this gap here would be the stairs if you were going up and down. Now that this piece here is mounted on the wall, this will hold the gate securely. So when you want to go up or down the stairs, you just simply open the gate, go up or down, close the gate. Now there will be a post here in the middle where I'm standing and a latch that will go from the gate to the post to keep it closed. Other than that, that's all there is to it. This is how it works. So here's the two gates that you saw me make. Now I went to install these at the person's house that these are going to go to, and I ran into a little problem. Neither one of them fit. So I actually went to their house and measured first. So my measurements were off. I'm not sure what happened. So completely my fault. Like I said, I'm the one that took the measurements. So what I did was take some more measurements and I told them that I would rebuild them. So here's what I came up with. So this is the new gate for this side, and you can see how much of a difference, almost 5 or 6 inches here. Now this is a little bit smaller this way too, but I rebuilt the gate for this side. And then on this side as well. So again, almost 5 or 6 inches too short, and I made this gate a little bit shorter this way so that it would fit in the gap. So here's another angle of these gates. Now I made these with the exact same process of what you saw earlier. The only thing I did different was use 5/16 inch plywood in the middle, and I planed the outside of the gates down a little bit more so that they would be a lot lighter. These went together really well, just like the other ones did. So hopefully my measurements are right this time. So I didn't want to film me putting these up in their house, but assuming that these do go in properly, there will be some pictures of the final install coming up.
So here are the gates installed. You can see I used a big barrel bolt at the top to install to the post. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay tuned for more.